Hello, everyone. My name is John Zalewski, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on managing multi-generational teams, brought to you by the Wisconsin School of Business Office of Alumni Relations and the Wisconsin School of Business Center for Professional and Executive Development. This is the first webinar in the 2020 Alumni Webinar Series. Before we get started, I want to turn it over to the Director of Alumni Relations at the Wisconsin School of Business, Shannon Tim. Shannon?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon Tim. As John mentioned, I'm the Director of Alumni Relations at the Wisconsin School of Business. It's really great to have so many alumni tuning in today from around the globe. I think you're really going to enjoy today's topic on multi-generational teams. I know that as I've met alumni from across the country, management and leadership are by far the topics that I hear alumni talk about the most. So I'm really excited that we have Artel Smith with us today to go in depth on this topic. I think it's going to be a good one. I also want to mention that if this is the first time that you're joining us for a webinar, I'll mention that we record each presentation, so you can reference it later, or you can even watch previous presentations that you might have missed. So you can find those at wsb.wisc.edu/alumni. It's the URL on the screen that you see right now. And in addition to webinars, there are a number of other ways to stay connected and get involved with the Wisconsin School of Business. One of which is Day of the Badger, which is going to take place on April 7th and 8th. We could go to the next slide. Oh, there we go. So this is really a moment in time for us to celebrate what makes the university and the Wisconsin School of Business great. So participants can either give back, wear red, or stay connected. So last year we actually trended globally on Twitter, which was really exciting. And there was just incredible energy from Badgers around the globe. So we're really looking forward to doing things bigger and better in 2020. And if you're interested, you can get more information at dayofthebadger.org. It's the URL you see on screen. In addition, here's a look at upcoming events across the country. So Professor Bob Batt in our Operations and Information Management Department is going to be a featured speaker, as well as Dean Samba at events coming up in Scottsdale, Coachella Valley, and Naples. We're also going to be hosting a networking event at LinkedIn's global headquarters in Silicon Valley on March 17th. And then you'll see our remaining webinars for 2020 are also listed here. So for more information on any of these events, head to wsb.wisc.edu/alumni. And, or you could look for a list of these events in your next issue of Business Casual, which is going to be coming out in March. Finally, we've heard from participants that people want a way to have more conversation with each other on these topics. So after today's presentation, we're going to invite you to keep the conversation going on Twitter. If you don't already, follow us at WISC-BUS-alumni, and we'll prompt more discussion there. So if at the end of today you find yourself wanting to share your own experience, or if you want to tap into the rest of the alumni network for advice on something, join this discussion, and it'll be a great place to have that conversation. So head to Twitter after today's presentation, or you could look for a link in our follow-up email. So once again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm going to turn it back over to John to get us started.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm going to introduce our presenter in just a moment, but first a quick word about the Wisconsin School of Business Center for Professional and Executive Development. CPED partners with individuals and organizations to enhance performance and productivity through professional development programs, certificates, coaching, consulting, and assessments. More than 70 programs are delivered annually on-site here at the Fluno Center in beautiful downtown Madison by instructors with practical real-world experience. We also partner with a variety of organizations to provide customized on-site training. For more information, please visit us online at uwcped.org. And one last thing before we begin, I do want to mention that we will be taking questions during today's session. You can submit a question using the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel over on the right, as indicated here on your screen. We will be keeping the line muted since we have so many people who joined us today, but if you do have questions, please submit them using that question box, and we will address them as time allows. You can also expand or collapse that sidebar using the orange arrow, also as indicated here on your screen. And as Shannon had mentioned, we will be recording today's session, and a link to that recording and the page where you can view previous sessions will be sent out within a few days. You'll also receive a link to a survey afterward, and we really ask that you take a few minutes to complete that, as your feedback is very valuable to ensuring that we're providing maximum value with the series of webinars going forward. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the facilitator of today's session, Artel Smith. Artel has nearly 30 years of experience in human resources management and has worked for a number of industry-leading companies during the course of his career, including ExxonMobil, Fidelity Investments, Hewitt Associates, and Aon. Artel is currently the Vice President of Talent and HR Shared Services at Quad, where, among other responsibilities, he leads the entire talent lifecycle from onboarding and training and development to talent assessments, performance management, and succession planning. Artel is also an instructor here at the Wisconsin School of Business Center for Professional and Executive Development. He teaches in a variety of manager, leader, and executive programs. Artel has a Master of Public Administration from Brigham Young University, where he also earned a BA in History and Political Science. And with that, Artel, I will turn it over to you.
Well, John, thank you so much. Are you able to hear me clearly? I just want to do a sound check.
You're sounding great, Artel.
Okay, thank you so much. So thanks everyone for joining today, and especially Shannon for the invitation from the Alumni Association. It's a great privilege and pleasure to be here. So we're going to just start off with a quick framing. We are going to talk today about multi-generational workforce management, and I'm going to take a slightly different approach versus what I've been teaching for the last 5 or 6 years now at CPED. When this topic came up in great strength a few years ago, for the most part, individual participants wanted to simply know how to deal with millennials. That was the presenting problem, and then it became a little bit later, how do we deal with boomers and millennials in the same team? And then how do we deal with digital natives on the same team? And what does it mean when everyone is all together working on a team trying to get to the objectives? So been doing a little bit more research on this question, and what you're going to hear today will come from a number of different books that help us to identify better the kinds of relationships that could be built on a team regardless of the number of people and the number of people from different generations who may be on the team, small or large, whether it's a demographic within your entire organization, tilted toward one generation versus another. What I'm hoping to do here is to provide a little bit of a counterpoint in some other ways that you could build the relationships with individuals on your team and effectively manage the teams all together. The books that you see here are ones that I'm going to recommend as we go along, and you'll hear some components of the presentation which will come from those books. So very first, I'd like to sort of level set. Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, talks a little bit about two juxtaposed mindsets that are evident, I think, in almost everyone, the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. Not going to dwell on this very long, but I do want to mention that in terms of my total outlook on things, the growth mindset is really what makes the biggest difference when you're managing a team and building relationships. No one likes to believe that they're stuck in any one particular place, and they certainly don't like to hear it from a manager or a peer. Individuals and organizations want to know that they can go anywhere and that they will acquire new skill along the way, whether the organization be large or small, and frankly, whatever organization they may go to. So we're approaching this from a growth mindset perspective, and thanks to Carol for her wonderful book and what we all know is going to be, is really taking hold. So the question in front of us is, how much does generational knowledge matter? And if it does matter, what are the things that matter most? So just posing this question, we're going to go down a couple of paths and understand a little bit more about how to answer it. So conventional wisdom is this: to manage a multi-generational team, you have to know a lot about generational characteristics. And almost all of us could, if put to the test, say a few things about each generation and what it is we like best about them, or what it is we may like least about a generation. And for the most part, we're resorting to labels of some kind. Boomers do this, and Gen Xers do that, and digital natives do another thing. And pretty soon we'll have another generation in the workforce. And don't forget, we have the silent generation who still is a percentage of the workforce. All of this is very interesting, and from my point of view, you absolutely should know some things about generations and the big trends that are governing how we think about some generations. But that's not really all there is. this is kind of what you're seeing right now is sort of the traditional thing that many instructors and others point to when they think about the differences in generations and what it is that a manager, individuals on a team should do. So for example, this is how it works. If you look on the coaching row, under traditionalists, you need to be respectful, deferential, and sparse, meaning you shouldn't have to say too much. Boomers, treat them as equals, keep narrow focus. Gen X, millennials, and digital natives, explain it, have a hyper focus, and build trust. So I like the fact that we can break it down to these smaller constituent parts, and it does help us to build new wisdom as we go along. In the end, this isn't really enough because any baby boomer may not, for example, like to keep a narrow focus when coaching is happening, and a digital native may not want, may want, instead of a very hyper-focused approach, they would appreciate something that is more expansive about their career. So this has its place, and I would be the first to recognize that it does, but it's not really helping us in the fashion of building relationships that can really make the biggest difference. So this little premise is that the generational constructs can point us in a direction, but it's really only that. I might be going north. I know I'm walking north. I'm going to enter a new place based on my generational orientation, but it doesn't really get us to true understanding. My team right now that I have consists of very early career individuals who just recently graduated from college to folks who are in the 35, 40, even 50-year range of service with an organization, and they certainly all need something different. But let's talk about what are the things that could make the most difference. The evolving conventional wisdom then is that generational generalities do tend to elicit some overly emotional responses. I've taught just enough classes at CPED to hear how this goes down. And it doesn't take many comments before one generation is feeling slightly offended. And as a result of that, it pushes people apart. Now, this is not always true, but again, I'm working sort of the margins here when it comes to our generalities. So for our purposes here, let's set aside generalities and deal with the whole person. I'm using the word onlyness. It's not my word. And we'll talk about the author that coined this and wrote a book about it that will help us to bring people together in a deeper relationship. We're going to hear from Dr. Leah Georges, who's an assistant professor at Creighton University. This is a short video, and it'll kind of set the stage for where we're going next.
People want work that matters. They want flexibility. They want support. They want appreciation. They want better coffee. But none of these things are tied to a generation. Now, sure, we see small differences in what people want. We know 20-year-olds and 60-year-olds go home and do different things. They have different values, at least when it comes to things happening outside of work. But I think what's happened is that this focus on generational cohorts, these groups of people, has created a space where we've just forgot that people are people. And to know who they really are, who we really work with, we have to figure out how to better navigate this multi-generational workplace than ball pits. Call me one of those idealist millennials, but I think we can get there. And I don't think the idea is too terribly difficult. What if we radically, simply, not easily, meet people where they are? Individualize our approach. I've never met a generation. I've had a lot of conversations with people who happen to identify with a specific generational cohort. I know that 80-year-olds text message and 23-year-olds crochet blankets. None of these things are stereotypical of that generation, right? Nilofer Merchant, she's a thought leader in innovation. She tells us we have to meet people in their onlyness. That is that spot in the world where only we stand as a function of our unique history, our experiences, and our hopes.
Listen to the entire presentation. But what you're seeing Dr. Georges say is that, as it turns out, there are other ways that we can consider the generational paradigms. And frankly, we need to think about this concept of onlyness. And onlyness comes from the book by Nilofer Merchant called The Power of Onlyness. And so just a very simple explanation, Merchant discusses onlyness as a very distinct spot where a unique person stands. And the uniqueness of that individual creates all the difference when it comes to reaching that person. It's, metaphorically speaking, a location where the person can be found. Now, Georges adapts this concept of onlyness and goes a little bit further down the road and describes an urgent necessity for us to meet that person where they are standing. From my point of view, these are really great concepts, and I'd love to be able to put them together just a little bit more. So my view of it is that Merchant and Georges have compatible ideas, but they're not identical. And what typically happens, as you know, when research comes out or a new book is published, that you read it, you take from it what you think will make the biggest difference, and then you modify it to your own situation. So my view of this is that the journey to that unique spot is where we really truly build the relationship. If I'm sitting down with one of my team members and they have a very strong interest in, for example, any given sports team, even though it might not be the one that I'm interested in, I really need to build a way to have a conversation that honors what that person is thinking. Now, I picked a sports team, which some of you might be amused about because I am not a really terrific fan of any sports team, but that's the kind of thing that you have to pay attention to. So the gathering of wisdom in this process, both creates and sustains the connection, whatever the topic might be. A very simple example beyond sports teams is the fact that another team member who's a generation younger than I am, we both share a love for certain kinds of books, and we talk about those books and share our belief systems about them, and it begins to build a relationship. This is not rocket science, but honestly, I do not see managers doing this enough. In fact, I think some managers are a little reluctant to engage in that kind of conversation because they think perhaps it's putting the individual on the spot. I would contend it's not putting the individual on the spot. Everything is in the approach, everything is in the context, but this is one way that we can think about this. We're going to go through and talk about 4 possible strategies that will allow us to understand more how to build these bridges and to find a person in their onlyness. The first we're going to review is the concept of applying a micro-community frame. I'll explain it as we get a little bit closer. The genesis of this was Peter Block's work in Community, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The second one is modeling authentic leadership behaviors. This is a tried and true method. What is very interesting, I think, about modeling authentic leadership behaviors is that you have to be consistent in doing it. You can't be a different leader tomorrow than you are today. Employees and friends and colleagues at work are hoping that you will be the same person when you deal with the individual on any given topic. The third is employing some very simple interaction models. We'll talk about 2 of them. These just happen to be favorites of mine, but there's many, many others that you could use. And the last one here of our 4 strategies is leveraging basic personality assessments. The opportunity here is large. These are 4 ways that I would suggest building relationships with your employees, spanning all generations and nationalities and backgrounds, is going to be the key to success in team building and in building closer relationships, frankly, to get more done, but also to make the experience more rewarding. So first, applying a micro-community frame. This concept, as I said, was prompted by the author Peter Block, and he's quite eloquent if you've ever heard him speak, and he's approaching the entire challenge of human interaction and relations from a community perspective. Now, when he says community, he is really talking about communities that are existent right now. It could be a town, it could be a place, it could be a whole organization, but it's an existing community. I'd like to take this just a little bit further and describe what we're talking about here as a micro community, starting with your team. You need to simultaneously manage the intimacy of the small box that your team may be in a larger organization while working very hard to integrate it into a larger whole. It's not simple, and any of us who have worked in very large organizations understand this can be complex and somewhat frustrating. I've worked for very large companies my whole career, and the challenge of a large organization is that you have to build a sense of identity and connectedness with the individuals who are right around you, because it is sometimes challenging to build that same connectedness with a larger organization. But all individual lives have to be touched in order to unite both the small groups and the large groups. And I think Block sets a nice premise for this. What the very simple approach, of course, is all relationships are founded on individuals, not on social constructs. The more we rely on a social construct, the more impersonal it becomes. So what's your social construct? Well, one can be, for example, a hierarchy within your organization. That's a construct. It's not like that at every company, meaning the structure and hierarchy you have in yours could be very different from the company down the street or the organization that you work with in some other capacity. But the truth is, those social constructs frequently get in the way of building those better relationships. So how do you make your team a micro community? However small it might be, think a little bit about the fact that as a micro community, as something that has purpose and meaning and indeed some structure, how do you create the better environment, the thing that will really make the difference to a person as they come to work every day? Let's say that the priority or one of the priorities of your micro community is to build positive relationships, meaning it's not the afterthought, but it is the perpetual journey to make sure that what your team is doing can be both productive and efficient and rewarding and satisfying all at once. I'd like to describe this as a concept called productive camaraderie. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue easily, but here's what I mean. Productive camaraderie is the two aspects that almost every team, group, organization, pair of people, whoever you think of, they need to get stuff done. They need to do it together, they have to be efficient, and they must do it. They must be able to do it in a way that helps to make progress, generally speaking. But camaraderie is an additional thought that's not just about being productive. It's about building a feeling of mutual trust and friendship across the individuals on a team and helping the employee to realize and help them to know that they are more important than the work. Many managers, in my experience, will sit down with employees on a team and they will have their one-on-one conversation. And when I am coaching managers, I ask them, what are the kinds of things that you're talking about in those one-on-ones? And frequently I will get back, well, the project they're working on, or the deliverable that's coming up, or the technology that we have to implement. And that's fine and good. It's a task orientation and it helps the team to be productive, but it doesn't necessarily build mutual trust and friendship. If there's a way for the manager and the employee to meet in a place where those two things become the preeminent goal is to have a trusting relationship, the employees and the managers, not only do they work better together, but they get more done. And that takes us back to the productive thought. So that's the first of the strategies. I'm kind of going through these quickly, as you can tell, but it gives you some ideas about where to go, where to look, and I would commend to you Peter Block's book to help you round out your thinking on that. The second strategy is modeling authentic leadership behaviors. They're related, almost all these concepts are related in some way, but this is a different door to walk through when you get in the house. What is an authentic leader? What does it look like to an employee? And what does it mean to be consistent in those leadership behaviors? The way that leaders build authenticity is by having a clear understanding of their purpose, built on a solid set of values that they practice every day. They lead with their heart. Again, this is the people first concept. They establish the connected relationships and they demonstrate self-discipline, meaning that they are consistent in who they are, that an individual employee can approach the manager with a solid belief and understanding that they value integrity, that they value honesty, that they value ethical behavior, they value the community. And so the self-discipline that I'm referring to here is the role of the manager to be as consistent as possible in doing things that build authenticity to the individual. I had a manager at one point at Fidelity, one of the large companies that I worked for. She was my superior. I reported to her, and what was really clear from the very start with building a relationship with that individual is that she cared about what I was doing, and she cared about manifesting herself consistently to me in every meeting, every offsite, every interaction with a client. That gave me the solid comfort, that gave me the belief that I could potentially make a mistake, but I would get from her a realistic and heartfelt assistance as opposed to what sometimes turns into feedback in air quotes, which doesn't really feel like a heartfelt experience many times. So building authenticity is a favorite topic of Bill George, who's a Harvard professor. He continues to run classes at Harvard. I was just looking at one of his classes that he's offering this summer, and it is on the topic of authentic behavior. Let's hear what he has to say. Again, a short video clip.
In our study of 125 leaders that led to my book True North, they were very authentic people. People know they're authentic when they meet them. And if you're working for a leader you can't trust, you'll never give them your heart. You'll never do your best work. So authenticity becomes key because you have a sense of a person's purpose, why they're leading and where they're leading. They practice their values every day. If you can't trust the values of someone on and off the job, you don't want to work for them. And they know how to build long-term connected relationships. And you know you can count on them. They have the self-discipline to show up, to be there, to deliver against their commitments.
It's a great commentary by Bill George, and you can read about it in several books that he's written, and giving people tips on how to be the authentic leader and sharing very, very helpful stories of the journey of many leaders to this place of authenticity. So what are the characteristics of an authentic work relationship? What are some of the behaviors that go with it? So first and foremost is the frequency of positive interactions. If you've ever had the experience of sitting at your desk or your work area, whatever it might be, and you have your manager come up into the work area, coming over to where you are, and every time the manager does that, it's to say something critical about what you've done, or to ask you about whether you're going to meet that deadline, or to remind you about a really critical part of a project. I wouldn't describe those as necessarily positive interactions, meaning they're very task-oriented. They don't really give you a sense of the individual caring. They don't really build a relationship. It's simply the productive side of productive camaraderie. However, if you can positively interact with the person on a regular basis, a very simple thought, it can yield tremendous results. There's an individual I work with right here. I walk by his desk every day. We have an ongoing sort of joke. Every time I walk by, I tell him that I'm going to check and see, if he's there working. And he doesn't report to me. He's not on my team, but he's a very, very diligent manager. And so whenever he sees me, I say the word check, and I put a little air check on my little record, and he responds back check, and we smile at each other and we have a good laugh. And it's so simple, it's so easy, it's so fun that he feels toward me that he can talk to me and that I'm approachable because I have this very simple interaction with him. I know it feels like it's kind of crazy, it's a small thing, but the truth of the matter is that small things can matter very much. Caring about what the employee cares about is another component of the authentic relationship, of the authentic leader. It used to be there was an interaction model that went something like this: start on the personal side, then get to work, then get to business, and then end on the personal side. It was a very simple model. It demonstrated that the person really cared, and it can't be perfunctory. You know what perfunctory is in a workplace. You walk in the building from the parking lot or walk to your job site, and you tip your hat or your head in a direction of someone and say, hey, how are you? How are things going? How was your weekend? You don't really want a response because that's going to slow your progress into the building. It's going to make you late for whatever it is you think is more important. But imagine the power of occasionally interacting with those very same people that you simply nod your head to or say, how you doing? And stopping and asking them some questions and listening to the responses with real intent. That is a way for you to prioritize the individuals over the work. Again, simple strategies for building connectedness and for finding a person in the place where they stand most comfortably. Our next strategy is going to be something that I've labeled employ simple interaction models. I mentioned one here along the way. I think Dale Carnegie and his Winning Friends and Influencing People is probably ground zero to a simple model that's used for just that, winning friends and influencing people. Almost everything that I've ever read since the point where that work came out is derivative. it touches on the same notion that simple is best, and those interaction models are the ones that have staying power in their simplicity. So I'm going to pick two simple models. One is called the 6 Conversations, and the other is called Bragg, Worry, Wonder, Bet. Some of you may have heard of these. You may have had a chance to read the book. It was written by Steve King. That's Stephen Dale King, not the horror author, but the author of these simple models. He was the former executive director at the Center for Professional and Executive Development, and over the course of the last 20 years, I've had a chance, a little bit more than 20 years actually, to use both of these models in creating simple, effective, connected relationships. The first one we're going to mention is 6 Conversations. You're going to hear Steve's voice. I don't have a video of him, but he did do an audio recording of the book, and we'll just hear him tee this particular component up, and let's listen to what he says.
6 Conversations. It turns out that employee expectations of managers are pretty simple. They want to be treated with respect. They want to be treated fairly. Respect and fairness are sort of table stakes for a manager that must ante up when he or she starts supervising others. While I will comment about respect and fairness off and on through this book, they are not the central focus. Beyond respect and fairness, there are 6 questions most employees want their managers to help them answer. These questions are as follows. Number 1, what's expected of me? Number 2, what and how should I develop? Number 3, how am I doing? Number 4, how did I do? Number 5, how will I be rewarded? And number 6, what's next for me? This book is based on following the simple proposition. If a manager can successfully answer these 6 questions with his or her employee and treat employees with respect and fairness, those employees will be productive and engaged at work.
Don't you love listening to Steve's voice? It's very calming all the way around. And so Steve is a tremendously good teacher and mentor. I've known him for over 20 years, and he practices what he preaches. So 6 Conversations, the way he describes it, is exactly what I've tried to use in most of the organizations I've been in since the late 1990s. There's magic in those 6 questions. Even the very first one of what's expected of me, what a great way to start building the relationship with the individual employee. Having an honest, open, here are the things that you can anticipate, here are the things that we should be accomplishing together, here's how you will be assessed, using assessed in a very loose framework, here are the things that will matter most. And then proceed on with any of the other 5 of the remaining 5 questions to build a relationship. The questions are not in order. You don't have to consider them in order. You don't have to do more than more than one question at one time. I've had over the last 2 years over 1,200 managers in courses that I've taught that have been introduced to 6 Conversations. And the interesting thing is, they have easily forgotten everything else I said, but they will remember the 6 Conversations. And this is a simple model and framework that we can all use. The second simple model and framework, called Bragg, Worry, Wonder, Bet, is also from Steve King. This is the simplest, I think, of all of his models, but powerful in the way that it's used. So his viewpoint is that when you need to have a how am I doing conversation or how did I do conversation, the Bragg, Worry, Wonder, Bet gives you some structure that allows you to enter into the conversation simply and easily. Don't get too hung up on the words. If you don't like the word brag, which is about the things that are going well and that you want to reinforce, then pick some other word. Same with wonders and bets and worries, whatever is most comfortable to you. But I will say that the second word in this mantra of 4 possibilities, worry, is a little bit of magic. What I mean by that is, if you're having a challenge with an employee that you've tried to build a relationship with, that you've tried to coach, that you've tried to encourage them to improve over a period of time, that when you approach that individual in the spirit of I'm going to give you feedback and here it comes, get ready for it, most of the time it doesn't work very well. I love using the word worry because it disconnects the pointedness and the sharp end of feedback and begins to talk about it with a person in a real way, in a connected way that puts the person above the work. I'm worried that we're not able to accomplish all that we're supposed to. What do you think? I'm worried that that the relationships on the team are not going as well as they should, or I'm worried that the relationship you have with me is not going as well as it should. What do you think, and how do you think we can improve? It's very different than sitting in front of an individual and saying, our relationship is not working. We have to fix this. And while the direct approach might be seductively easy, it turns out it doesn't get you the best results. But using the framework of Bragg, Worry, Wonder, Bet gives you a whole lot more to work with. And frankly, it's more, it's practical, but it's also more considerate of the individual on your team or the individual you want to build a relationship with in total. One little quick note on the issue of providing feedback. Providing regular feedback, especially developmental, is not the same as building a relationship. So I had a CEO of a company I worked for a number of years ago, and he used the phrase on a pretty regular basis, feedback is a gift. And then he would say to the person he was providing feedback to, and here's your gift. It's wrapped in a very pretty bow, it has nice paper on it, but when you take it apart and you look inside, it doesn't really feel like it's relationship building, and it feels pointed and potentially hurtful. So it became a joke, unfortunately, in the organization. I'm going to sit down and give you feedback, and you're going to think it's a gift. Ha, ha, ha. And that, of course, did not really promote a culture of connectedness and putting the individual above the work. So that's just one special note, and you probably experienced it yourself. The fourth of the strategies is that I'm going to discuss here is leveraging basic personality assessments. I'm a big fan of assessments. Most of you have probably used one or more, either as a team building device or as an organizational and community building device. The leveraging of these personality assessments gives you a way to talk to the person and allow you to understand more about the kinds of behaviors that may be typical of the individual without in a defensive way trying to adapt to them. So the four here, and I'm just really going to touch lightly on these, but the basic assessments that I'm talking about that from my perspective beat generational generalities every single time. Myers-Briggs type indicator, the DISC assessment, the Clifton strengths, which was formerly called Clifton strengths finders, and some of you may be familiar with that one, and the fourth one that's called true color personality assessment. I think the last one is probably the most fun to use. It's very lighthearted, but it has a serious core to it, and I think it's a great one that hopefully you may want to use in your future. The very basic assessments, and again, I'm going to touch really lightly on this, is that the MBTI assesses the individual against four dichotomies. You know what these are because you experience them every day at work. Someone who's a little more extroverted versus someone who's a little more introverted. Someone who's a little bit more process and sensing versus someone who relies very much on their intuition. Someone who's all about thinking and some who are more about feeling, and the same with judging and perceiving. I was in a class about 6 months ago. It was an executive class, and one of the individuals raised his hand and he said, "Artel, really? Do you use MBTI at work? I mean, come on, it's been around forever." That was basically the tone of the question. And it gave me a moment to pause, collect myself, right? Don't respond too quickly to something like that. And I told a story, of course. And the story is, my current boss is a little introverted. She's a high thinker. And I know that if I'm going to build a relationship with her, I have to honor the fact that she is a little more introverted and that she is a high thinker. And by the way, she likes process and agendas. Those bosses, over the years, I've had bosses who are exactly like that and some who are exactly not like that. But in answering the question, it is yes, I use this every day. In fact, I probably at my current employment, I use it even more than other places. It's a very helpful framework, and many of you probably have been through MBTI. The second one is DISC, another very popular assessment. Again, many of you may have been using this. It puts you into relative positioning against four areas: dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. My view is that DISC can be predictive of MBTI assessments and MBTI can be predictive of DISC assessments. So they're a very nice combination of things that could be used, very straightforward, a great report that's produced, and something that you can easily review not only with your team, but also with individuals. The most important thing is to be self-disclosing. Don't ask someone to do the DISC assessment and then pour over their results without you sharing yours, and in that process, journeying closer to where the other person is standing. The third one, Gallup Clifton Strengths is what it's called. Its new name is also a wonderful assessment that's been around for quite some time, and it orients you toward 4 domains of team strength or individual strength, and you see that across the top of this slide: executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. I would tell you that I have people that I've worked with and teams that I work with that swear by this. They believe it's one of the best team building exercises they've ever done, and they're able to have an ongoing dialogue using the language of strength finders to understand why someone is approaching you in a certain way, or why someone is not accomplishing things the way you thought it should be accomplished. This again appeals to the journey of finding out more about how that individual is wired and what makes the biggest difference. The fourth one is called the True Color Personality Assessment. You can read in the top right-hand corner what it basically is trying to do. It's similar to the other 3, but it is a more fun and lighthearted way to understand someone else's personality. Whatever color you may be, orange, gold, green, or blue, there's things that go with those colors, characteristics, traits, behaviors, and so forth. And it's a very fun team building exercise. And I'd encourage you, if you haven't used any of the assessments, you might want to start here. All 4 of these assessments are available online. You can go to the websites, you can take your own test, you can have your team take the assessment, you can work with the training department in your organization to help you put together a short team experience leveraging one of these personality assessments. All of them are good, all of them work. I think you just have to decide which one goes best with your environment. So we've had a chance now to talk about these 4 strategies: micro-community, authentic behaviors, simple interaction models, and leveraging and basic personality assessments. We're going to bring it all together in this concept of infusing diversity and inclusion principles along the way. So I'll get right into this. It's the way to weave sort of the final story. Diversity is the mix, inclusion is making the mix work. Author Andreas Tapia, I worked with him for a number of years. He wrote a great book, The Inclusion Paradox, and in that book, he gives you a sense of really what the difference is. Many leaders, managers, employees, they look at diversity and inclusion as it's 2 different sides of the same coin. I believe that's partially true, but the mix that you have on your team may not always be because you picked that mix. So instead, you have to focus on, how does inclusion work? How do I make the most connected relationships understanding inclusion? This is just a very simple definition. I'm not going to dwell on this very much, but it gives you a sense of diversity, understanding, accepting, and valuing differences between people. And inclusion is the collaborative, respectful, and supportive environment that increases the participation of all employees. I would make the argument that the 4 strategies we talked about up in the earlier part of this webinar is exactly what inclusion, it will exactly be the kinds of strategies you would need to help people feel included in the environment and feel like the person that they're dealing with cares more about them than the individual, than the work itself. We're going to hear Andreas talk a little bit about this. This is the last of the videos, and we're just about getting close to time as well. I encourage you to listen to this one. Why diversity is upside down. Let's hear Andreas.
We need to be thinking about diversity in a multidimensional way. So much of Diversity 1.0 has been unidimensional, hasn't it? Black, Latino, Asian, Native American, gay, straight, female, male, with disability, without. But we are more than just one identity, aren't we? I mean, we have our gender, we have our sexual orientation, we have our ethnicity, we have our race, we have our nationality. We have our generation that we're from, We have our personality. We have the things that we're good at, the things that we love to do. And we are a variety of these different things in combination. In fact, who am I? Well, let me count the ways. I can be Chinese, I can be a woman, I can be a millennial, I can be a single parent, right? I can be a man, I can be British, I can be with a disability, I can be gay, and so on and so forth. You can combine these boxes horizontally, vertically, and diagonally in actually infinite ways. And every single one of you sitting here, you are a combination of these identities, including those of you who have been traditionally 1.0 majority. You also are diverse in a multidimensional way. And this leads to new blends that we need to address. We can have the gay veteran Xer. We can have the extroverted person with a disability, the millennial female manager, right? The boomer African-American general manager with adult kids, the lesbian single mother, the immigrant woman Muslim engineer, the working single dad executive, the white male minority. Diversity 1.0 does not have answers to this complex reality. If I am black and gay, which affinity group do I go to? The black group doesn't understand my gayness. The gay group doesn't understand my blackness. So we need to address multidimensionality in our diversity.
Multidimensionality is a good way to wrap up this webinar. As you readily will see, this could have been the first thing that we talked about. It's a wonderful explanation of the fact that all of us bring so many different things, and in order to be connected to each other, connected to our manager, connected to our teams and companies, we have to be honored with all of those different dimensions at the same time. It's daunting. I don't want to mislead anyone to think this is an easy thing to do once you understand where someone comes from. That's where all the fun begins. And I mean fun in a very fun way. Knowing somebody for who they are, what they stand for, the things that they represent, the things that they like, gives you a chance to honor them. From an authenticity perspective, if you can honor them, if you can respect them, if you can help them to see that you care more about them than the work itself, you will make an enormous amount of progress. So making inclusion as an imperative, understanding, leading, delivering, being courageous, being creative, it helps you to set the talent free, meaning that the talent of your team, of the individual you're building a relationship with, becomes so much more when you can honor all of these different components. When you can meet the person in their onlyness, where they stand, that's really the beginning of wisdom. And with that, I think, John, I'll turn this back over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Artel. I do want to take a couple of questions. So if there are any questions that anybody has, please feel free to type them in the questions box now. We've had a couple come in already, so I'll read those while we're waiting for some others to come in. So Artel, at the beginning of the presentation, you did reference a number of books. Are there one or two of those that you would recommend people get started with?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, as I mentioned earlier, that Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, is to me one of the most important works of the last several years. I believe that's a great one to start off with. And I would also say that Andreas's book, The Inclusion Paradox, is another one. Those are tremendously helpful. They're insightful. They certainly have helped me along the way.
Great, thank you, Artel. Another question we had come in was with regard to the personality assessments, and you had indicated that those really can beat generational generalities. So how do you start to use those effectively in your organization? And as a follow-up question, how do you start using assessments and building them into the culture of the company rather than a one and done exercise?
Yeah. The last part is a little bit harder to answer, but I will say the first part. I frequently get this question in the classes in the business school. And basically, I have to say this: if your organization already has a preferred approach for assessments, make sure that you are tapping into that strength and that you can bring that knowledge and wisdom to your own team if they haven't already experienced it. That's really what helps you change the culture. It happens that in my current organization, as well as when I was at Exxon, MBTI was the favored approach. And everybody learned the language, and in learning the language, we could approach each other more specifically. If you don't have that kind of environment, pick the assessment that you're most drawn to and have a team meeting. There's wisdom in simply bringing together the individuals and talking about their reports. You can build tremendous rapport just in that activity.
Great, thank you, Artel. Another question we had come in here was with asking for some advice for a new people manager. In this situation, we have an attendee who is managing someone older and more experienced than themselves, and are wondering if you have some tips or advice or best practices for managing a situation like that.
Yeah, maybe the person's talking about me because I feel impossibly old at this point. I would say that the very first thing I would do is sit down with the individual and say, I'm a new manager. I'm not exactly sure about how I should be doing this, and I would love to have your advice. And just open the dialogue with respecting the experience that individual has. Let them speak into the situation. You as a manager get a chance to take it all in, to honor their perspective, and that will begin a dialogue that will turn into a very fruitful one over a period of time. Ask them.
Wonderful, thank you, Artel. And thank you for taking the time today to share your knowledge and expertise and insight. Any final words of wisdom you want to pass on before we let you go?
I think enough has been passed on, 10,000 words or more. So I would leave you just with the thought: if you're not 100% sure of what you should do, I would rely on Andreas's last summary conclusion. Start where the person is, and you won't go wrong.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again,
Thank you very
Artel,
much.
and thank you to everyone on the line for joining us for today's webinar. As a reminder, again, today's webinar has been recorded, and details for accessing that recording will be sent out within the next few days. And again, you will be receiving an experience about, or a survey about your experience today. And again, please take a few minutes to complete that. So thank you again, everybody, for your time, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.